I don't know how good it's coming through on the video, but this is Wilma, our milk cow. That right over there is the thunderstorm that is bearing down on us. And these are what I'm gonna call our outlaw goats. And I was going to do the video out here, but this thunderstorm is gonna get us inside. So I'll tell you real quick what it's about, then we'll go inside and do the video. But today's video is going to be about why you need to, if at all possible, diversify the livestock that you're raising and diversify the food that you're growing at your house, because the UN is coming for all of it.
I once was lost, oh, but now I am found. Was blind, but now I see.
All right, so we are inside, out of the rain and out of the thunderstorm. For those of you that don't know, we live in a 14 by 32 with 2 loft tiny house, right? One of them little shed buildings converted into a house. We have 3 children. My wife and I do. We got a 4th one on the way. So you're going to hear some noise in the background. You're going to hear some kids. My wife is being the loving wife that she is and is trying to watch YouTube videos with the kids to keep them quiet as we do this video. But we'll see kind of how it goes. So why should you diversify your livestock if you can on your homestead or on your farm? Why should you try to grow your own food as much as you can and those kinds of things? Well, the list of reasons is endless, truthfully. If you watch before we got our goats, we went and visited with the lady we were buying them from. She moved to Missouri from Arizona. She used to be a veterinarian, and one of her fears for the food supply was the mRNA technology being used in the food. So you have all the things that's being used in the food and all those kinds of things is one good reason. But another reason is, if you watched my last video about John Kerry declaring war on agriculture, if you will, in a lot of ways anyhow, claiming that agriculture produces somewhere around 1/3 of the emissions that is contributing to the global, what he called, crisis right now. He even talked about the money being raised for the war effort and the other countries that are working in alliance together for the war effort. And if you watch that video, I claimed that he is probably getting this from the UN because he was using all the UN talking points. Let me show you exactly why I believe that's the case now that I decided to look it up just out of curiosity. So that UN article I just showed you come from November of 2022. And if you listen to his speech and read the article, it's like point for point, word for word, the same exact type of language, needing to go to war on the different things to do with agriculture, needing to change the way that we do agriculture and all of those things because of the way it's contributing to the climate crisis that is currently going on. Now, I want to say this, first and foremost, I am not against finding innovative ways to do agriculture. I'm not, right? I'm not against those things if that were the actual goal, but it does not seem to be the goal. The goal seems to be to reduce agriculture for as much as possible. And one of the proofs in that video with John Kerry was that he talked about diet and how we have changed people's diets so much that we've made an impact on things like livestock markets, right? On selling livestock, specifically beef. And he talked about methane issues, which anytime some of these guys are talking about methane issues, they're talking about mostly cattle, right? Because that is probably the primary protein grown here in the United States. And so when they went to limit methane, what they're saying in all actuality is we want to limit cows. We want to get rid of our livestock population within the United States and truly around the world. Remember, the UN is called the United Nations. It's all of the nations pretty much all signed into the UN Charter that says we will do whatever you tell us to, UN. Really, the UN is our governing body, not Washington, D.C. You need to remember that. It's vitally important for you to understand what's going on in the world right now, the things, the policies that are going forth. First and foremost, you need to understand Scripture, and then secondly, you need to watch and pay attention to the things that the UN's put out. And the cool part is you don't have to go to a tinfoil hat wearing site to do it. You can go to the UN.org and find that information out for yourself anytime you're willing to put forth the effort. Go to the Sustainable Development Goals, read through them, and then you'll understand the green so-called so-called green agendas that are being pushed forth today, especially in the United States. So what does that have to do with diversifying your livestock at your homestead? Well, I actually had a conversation with a good friend of mine not too long ago, and we were talking about this. And it was just kind of really an idea that we were throwing back and forth, right? Thoughts and ideas that we were throwing back and forth and visiting about. Nothing very serious about the conversation other than just talking about the way things are right now. And this occurred to me. Several years ago, I'm going to say 75-ish years ago, maybe a little longer than that, a lot of your little country people out in the sticks, they kind of raised everything, if you know what I'm saying, right? So they raised, maybe some beef or some hogs or some sheep or some goats. In fact, before we got goats, I talked to my grandma about it because she grew up eating goat because somebody in her family raised up goats. Grew goats, like you plant them, like goat little seedlings in the garden. They raised up goats. I was making sure with my wife we don't actually plant goats, right? Like, I'm just playing, guys. So here's the deal, right? They raised up goats. My grandma milked cattle, right? Whenever she was young, their family had cattle, and they raised gardens and those kinds of things. Why is that important? Well, the more people that are independent, or as independent as possible, and I don't mean everything, right? I would really like to get to about an 80 or 90%. That's kind of my goal. Say, 10 years from now, is eating about 80 to 90% of our own animals that we are raising out of our garden, or hunting, fishing, catching, right? Whatever it takes. Trying to produce it ourselves. Somewhere around 80 to 90% is where I would like to be, and I actually think it's fairly feasible. But the reason why that's important is trying to get as independent as possible. Think about this for just a minute. If it could happen on a large scale in the United States, and I understand this isn't everybody's thing, not everybody's going to be able to do this, but if more people were as diversified as possible with their livestock, kind of like the whole, don't put all your eggs in one basket idea, right? If you are more diversified, maybe you still have your beef cattle farm and you're still raising beef cattle to try to make an income the best that you can, but maybe you also try to raise up some other protein on your property just for your personal use, and maybe sell enough to kind of pay for your own use or whatever. Same way with gardens or crops or whatever. If you can do a little bit like that, what that will do is as they start outlawing these big farms, the type of farms that feed the planet, if you will, right? The ones that big commercial farms and those kinds of things. I am all for like the permaculture kind of ideas, and trying to use your animals to raise your crops, and then use your crops to raise your animals, and build up the soil and all. I'm all about all of that, but I don't know how that works to feed the world, if you will, right? Like, I don't know that I really understand how that works. But if we could all do our part on a small scale, on our own individual families, whoever and however, if you've got a little bit of land and you can do that, what that does is that gives you meat security. See, it's not to fall in line with the UN, but it is to provide meat security for you and food security for you, because right now most of us are completely dependent on the food supply and the supply chain that is at our local supermarkets and grocery stores, right? And if COVID, one of the things that I don't want any of us to lose sight of, because I hear people say all the time, I just want things to go back to normal, like pre-COVID, right? And I understand what they're saying, but the truth of the matter is, if we ever go back to the way it was before COVID, we're ignorant. Unless we go back to the way it was like way before COVID, right? What if our little communities all around the country, and mind you, there's a bunch of them, little communities out in the country, what if we actually did diversify a little bit our livestock and tried to grow and raise up different animals to provide as much of our own protein as possible, also trying to sell a little bit to pay off for the feeds and all those kinds of things, fences and whatever sort of bills are associated with that. If we could diversify on a large scale around the nation, if we could kind of get this going almost as a movement, right? And then so we're a big family, and it wasn't that long ago, like they really limited how much milk you could buy at the grocery store during the height of all the COVID craziness, right? And like our kids don't drink a lot of soda. Our kids pretty much drink water, tea, and milk. Like that is the primary things they drink. And we're okay with that, right? And in fact, we encourage that. And so, right, to buy, 4 or 5 gallons of milk during a week, like that was something that we would do. Well, you couldn't do that at the grocery store. You could only buy maybe 1 or 2 gallons at a time, right? In fact, we maybe tried to fool the system a little bit, and my wife would go to the grocery store Monday morning, and then maybe I would go Monday evening and get us another couple gallons of milk, right? Because that's what our kids drank. Plus, we had small children, right, that were still drinking a lot of milk, and that was kind of their calorie intake because they were so young. If we are producing our own milk off of our own, say, dairy goats or dairy cattle or sheep or whatever it is, then we're not dependent on that grocery store or the supply chain, right? Let's say the truckers need to go on strike here in the United States to combat things like vaccine mandates, right? In order for that strike to be effective, the people need to be as independent as possible. That way we're not dependent on those trucks showing up to the grocery store. And then also what that should do, in all reality, it won't, but what it should do is drive down cost at the grocery store. And the reason why I say it won't is because it wasn't all that long ago, I heard 2 dairy farmers talking at the local feed store about having to sell their milk at a discounted rate or couldn't hardly sell it at all. Yet milk prices at the grocery store continued to climb, continued to skyrocket. Now, I did not go to a whole lot of school. I dropped out a couple of years in college, and I missed as much high school as I possibly could because hunting and fishing and those kinds of things were a lot more fun to me. And I'm not saying that's right. That's just kind of what I did. But what I did learn at school was the ideas of supply and demand, right? If you have an overabundance of supply, then the price should go down. If you have an overabundance of demand with not enough supply to fulfill the demand, right, then the price should go up. Explain to me why grocery store prices of milk continued to climb even though there was a surplus of milk. I remember an individual very close to me calling me at the height of the COVID craziness whenever the price of beef at the grocery store went so incredibly high, and he said, I ain't getting no more for him at the sale barn. So there was an abundance of that there, yet it was being falsely inflated at the grocery store. See, all of this really, at the end of the day, that the UN's doing, trying to do this war on agriculture, trying to stop livestock. Think about it for just a little bit, okay? Let's say they ban cattle. No more cattle, right? Maybe they grandfather in, and then no more cattle after that or whatever, right? Okay, so what little bit of meat would be at the grocery store would be so expensive that common folk won't be able to buy it. And then, okay, well now we got to raise more crops to make up for the food deficits of not having the protein. And so if we grow more crop, now we got to destroy more wild habitat, and we can't do that because we might kill some, spider that should have been extinct forever ago, whatever it is. Like we might kill some spider that lives in this homeland that we can't disturb now because we got to grow the extra crop. And they'll say, well, we can't do that either. Well, what will happen is then you're left with people starving because they can't afford their groceries, because what little bit of groceries at the store are extremely expensive. Now, the truth of the matter is, and what I know, a Bible-believing Christian, is that food shortages are going to come. Famines are going to come. Those things are going to happen. Biblically speaking, and now the secular world is in agreement with those things. How they're going to come, I'm not exactly clear. I do know, scripturally speaking, the Bible says that somewhere around a third of the grass and a third of the trees and those kinds of things are going to burn up. So it would seem as though it will be impossible to grow those things. If it's impossible to grow the very basic necessities of grain, then it's impossible to raise the livestock or even to make things out of that grain for us to eat. Therefore, there's going to be a lot of people die from famines and from pestilence, because the less nutrition you have in your body, the weaker your immune system is, the more rampant those pestilences, those sicknesses will get. And so, I believe it would behoove us, if you will, right? I believe it would be a good thing for all of us to really consider diversifying on our homesteads, our small farms, those kinds of things. If we diversified, and then if maybe we started little local markets again, right? Where we work together and we trade and we sell and we help each other out, right? So like if our neighbor down the road needs milk and we have milk and we have extra milk, we could sell them milk. And here's the deal, that money that they give us, it kind of stays local. But that is until they get rid of cash, of course, which is occurring. Are you noticing there's a theme to tear all of this down? But all we can do is the best we can and put our faith in the Lord most of all. However, I do think it is a wise move to learn from the COVID craziness that occurred over the last few years and stop and think about diversifying and getting close to our neighbors again, right? Learning what our neighbors do and what they enjoy and what kind of things they grow. And maybe we can all kind of work together to help each other out. That way, when it's not at the grocery store and it's your children and it's my children begging for food, maybe we could actually help each other out instead of depending on the Walmart down the road. We appreciate you guys watching. We'll catch you on the next video.